Evening, everyone. Tim, Addict, very glad to be here. So we're in the middle of chapter 9. We got some way through it last week, and as usual in these later chapters, what we've got is my little heading and then the section from the book. Another principle we observe carefully is that we do not relate intimate experiences of another person unless we are sure he would approve. We find it better, when possible, to stick to our own stories. A man may criticise or laugh at himself, and it will affect others favourably, but criticism or ridicule coming from another often produces the contrary effect. Now, this isn't necessarily a recipe for being an entire prig. So if you get on frightfully well with your sponsee and you have a good old laugh, and they say something bloody hilarious, of course you can take the mick out of them for it. If they're sensitive, then perhaps don't, can it, and then tell a story about yourself later. But in general, the advice I think is very helpful. A couple of things that have occurred to me. I may have mentioned this last week. A friend of mine who hears confessions says when you hear something in a confession, you don't bring it up at the next confession. So you don't use the information received against the person the next time, even if it would be really useful. And again, it's the same principle. If you get on terribly well with someone and you can bring things up without remotely giving offence or causing them to clam up in future, then go for it. But the sort of gold standard until you've got that degree of relaxation with someone is don't use something they said last time. You have to wait for it to come up in the moment. In the same way, one can't use privileged information one's acquired. One's simply got to wait for the person to bring the evidence to the table. And another piece of etiquette I was advised to observe when sharing it is to say I, not we, because it gets on a lot of people's nerves when people say, oh, we alcoholics, well, we're immature and we're miserable and we're full of low self-worth and we've got this gaping hole inside of us. And half the room is sitting there thinking, well, I haven't. You might want to speak for yourself. It doesn't do anyone any favours to do this. So to stick to I. Now, the next one could be enough for a few weeks of sessions, just the single line. The line is this: we alcoholics are sensitive people. It takes some of us a long time to outgrow that serious handicap. There is a Bob Newhart sketch. Some of you will know where this is going. There is a Bob Newhart sketch where someone comes to him. He was an American comedian and writer of sketches and monologues and so on. And someone comes to him as a psychotherapist and says that she's got some terrible problems. And he says, well, that's absolutely fine. The session will be $5 for the first 5 minutes and then free thereafter. And she says, well, that sounds almost too good to be true. He says, no, people won't need more than 5 minutes. I mean, I pretty much guarantee. She said, okay. And so she says that she's got this terrible fear of ending up in a box in the ground. And he says, well, I've got a wonderful answer for all of this rumination you're doing about this, all of this thinking you're doing about your own death. And she says, shall I get my pen and paper out? He says, well, you can. What I'm about to say, most people, well, they find it pretty easy to remember. But if you want to write it down, if it helps you to write it down, then write it down. And having explained her psychological situation, he leans forward and says, stop it. And then she tries to explain, but in my childhood, he says, no, we don't talk about that. And she says, but my astrologer said, we don't talk about that. And she tries to bring up some other things. He says, well, you can stop that as well. That won't do you any good at all. And there is this is not to say there isn't a tiny bit of looking at the past in step 4 and in step 8, where one does have to say the things. So these things are not to be buried, and one isn't to pretend they're not there. But I've found no value in the last 33 years in going over these things endlessly. I saw a little video the other day on one of the so-called social media platforms, where a rabbi was saying how the thing about the past, these awful things that have happened to you, and indeed the awful things you have done. He says, once you've said in plain neutral language what happened, what else are you going to say? What else is there to say about the thing? What, are you going to describe the colour of the wallpaper? You're going to describe the expressions of the faces of the people in the room. There is nothing to say about these things. And the problem, if I have a problem with something in the past, it ain't about the past. And I'll give you an example of how that works. I remember when I was 6 or 7, some incident happened and I was mocked cruelly by some other children at my primary school. And I may well have learnt a little lesson or taught myself a little lesson. I'm always going to be mocked and ridiculed by people. But if I'm remotely troubled in that way today, it is because I presently hold that belief. The origin of the belief is not the reason I'm still holding the belief today. The reason I'm holding the belief today is because I see some value in holding that belief today. And the net total of all of those old negative beliefs is that I don't have to be responsible for my life. My life is someone else's fault, because that is the thing that I'm ultimately scared of. Being scared of death or emotional pain or disease or being squashed by a dinosaur or a saber-toothed tiger or vaporized by a nuclear bomb. That's fear for kids. That's boring fear. That's entry-level fear. Real fear is when you realize you're responsible for your life and you have no idea how to live it. And when you get to the end of it, it will have gone wrong and it will have been your fault. And I think that is the ultimate fear. There's some 20th century philosophers who talk about this. That is the fear that is the real grown-up fear. The fear of having a responsibility to live a life and mucking it up. And this is where the program really comes in beautifully. I don't need to work out how to live my life. I simply need to go to God every day and ask God what to do. Now, what has this got to do with getting over it? It's because the reason I didn't want to get over anything was because I was avoiding that fundamental fear and facing it and finding a way through it by learning how to trust God. In other words, by recognizing I don't need to feel responsible for my life. I am responsible for it, but I delegate upwards, as it were, the ultimate responsibility for the decision making so that I can act with confidence. Once I've got that confidence, there is literally nothing else to fear. When there's nothing else to fear, there is nothing else to be victimized by. And I think that's the great reason why I held on to so many things for so long. The other thing, which I think is related, if one is ultimately frightened of what one's real purpose is in life, for God, in an eternal cosmic sense, what is my place in the universe? That's so frightening. The idea of eternity is so frightening. The idea of life after death. The idea that there might be more to life than the nuts and bolts of the physical world around us. The place to find refuge from that is in the physical world, where you have little plans and designs which are much more concrete and much more achievable. And my other aspect of sensitivity is trying to build a personality, a character, a life, material security, a financial base, all sorts of buffers, achieving qualifications and power and prestige and position in the world. And of course, if one's value and identity and purpose are dependent on all of those things in the world, because they're in the world, they're vulnerable. And so I'm going to be tremendously sensitive to anything which is liable to attack them. And so this is why I've spent a lot of my life reacting to things like a string of Chinese firecrackers. One little thing goes off and the whole string goes off. On the practical front of getting over it, is to, if anyone saw the original film of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I think they're squirrels sort the nuts into the good nuts and the bad nuts, and they're incredibly quick at it. And one of the children gets wrapped up in the mechanism and ends up being classified as a bad nut, I think. And my image is when events happen, what I want to do is get the event out of my system straight away without it entering me. So I hold the situation at arm's length. And I'm talking here not about the ordinary little things that happen, the emails that come in, but anything which is liable to produce a reaction. And with enough time in recovery, you get a little bit of a pause. So an event happens, a little alarm goes off and says, you could overreact to this. What you gonna do? And, at the beginning you have like half a second before the detonation. Tom says you get 1 second for every year. That's about right, I think. But in that time, this little sorting business, like the squirrel sorting the nuts, the good nuts from the bad nuts, the thing that has happened, is it a good thing or it's a bad thing? It's a good thing, fine, pass it on. If it's a bad thing, quick, is this something I can change? Or is this something I have to accept? And in 99% of, more than that, 999 cases out of 1,000, it is self-evident straight away. And so something happens, if it is unpleasant, and I'm liable to react immediately to say, this is meant to happen, this is supposed to happen, let's adjust to it instantly. This is the new state of affairs. Good, we're done. Now, is there anything I can do about it? Yes or no? No. Move on. Yes. Do something. Move on. And a lot of the sensitivity that I've experienced has been because I've allowed myself to react and then have to spend the rest of the day pulling myself back from the reaction, because the reaction creates such a kind of mental cascade of neurotransmitters and electrical signals and hormone pumpings out from various glands and organs in the body. It can take a day or two to really get your system back to normal after a major overreaction. Much better to catch it in the moment. Next section from chapter 9, putting money first. We think it dangerous if he rushes headlong at his economic problem. And then later on, he must see the danger of over-concentration on financial success. Although financial recovery is on the way for many of us, we found we could not place money first. For us, material well-being always followed spiritual progress. It never preceded. Now, there's a paradox here. When I joined AA in the early 90s, I didn't have any money. In fact, I had less than 0 pence. I had a little bit of debt. I had no income. I was living with a relative in a very troubled situation. I won't go into details. If I weren't to live there, I'd have to go back then to my parents, as they were still living in Dorset, no transportation and no AA meetings. There's no way I could have stayed sober. I tried to stay sober in Russia on the one group in the city I lived in. It wasn't enough. I needed London AA, which is why I moved back from Russia. And now, in a sense, the first thing I had to do was secure my existence in London, in order that I could go to meetings, in order that I could have a spiritual awakening and stay sober, do all of those things. The material had to come first, but there's a curious thing. I'd spent years waltzing around the world saying, there's no work for me, there's no job for me, I can't do anything, people will just have to look after me because I'm so special and talented and tragic. I just deserve other people's money. The little people can go and work, and then they can give me some of their money because I'm so cute when I'm crying. That was my basic MO. And occasionally I would try to burst out of that and find a job. My brain would not work. I remember going to a bookshop once and saying rather timidly, do you have a job? And they said no, and then went on to a customer. And I went back home and said to the people I lived with, I have scoured the job market. I had the sense that I had exhausted all possibilities. I just didn't have the character to do things in the world. Now, what does it mean, spiritual progress? I had to have the spiritual progress to go to people in AA and say, I'm effed. My situation is completely intractable. I need a job. I can't do anything. I don't know anything. I don't know how to get a job. I've never really worked. There was one place I worked, but I stole all their money. So there wasn't going to be any reference coming from them. And someone gave me an address, told me if you go there Monday, you'll get a job. And what is spiritual progress first? I believed them and I did what they said. So what spiritual progress usually involves for me is going to a grown-up, going to someone who knows about the thing I don't know about and saying, just show me what to do. And I tell you, I've had more problems with work and money than anything else. Apart from generally being an arsehole, I think that was perhaps my biggest thing, but that was more a problem for everyone else. That was kind of fun for me. But the problem I experienced as the worst problem was the problem with money and work. And in my first 8 years, I thought, right, I'm sober. I can get my own way now. And I created a sort of house of cards, financially and professionally. And there have been 3 points in my work life where I've given up completely and said, I don't care, God, higher power, AA, I don't care, you just tell me what to do. The first appointment was when I was completely new and I got this job, and my first job was buttering bread in the canteen of Warburg's. And I tell you, I had more self-worth at the end of a week of buttering bread in a canteen than I'd ever got from any so-called achievement in my earlier life, academically, other things. More genuine sense that I had a place in the world. And it came from saying, I don't care. I have no notion of what I'm good for. I have no notion of what I'm here for. Just give me something to do, and I promise, fingers crossed, I'll be happy with whatever it is. And boom, I'm working straight away. I had a tiny little nervous breakdown, just one of the small, very undramatic ones, but enough to cause me to leave my profession when I was around 7, 8 years sober, something like that. 7 years sober. I was on a 6-month notice period, which is quite a notice period. But I had to go in one day and say, you can either let me go in 2 weeks or I'm just going to go on the sick and you're going to have to pay me for 6 months, so can we make it 2 weeks? They said, okay. Because I couldn't go into the building anymore. I felt so physically sick at the idea of going in. And I remember standing in my kitchen. I hope I haven't told this story before, at least not recently. I stood in my kitchen. I remember saying to my higher power, I literally don't care. As long as I don't have to go back to what I was doing, it's all fine by me. And then this process started, and then for a good 20 years, everything was absolutely fine. Everything just fell in my lap. I got all twitchy last year about money and work, and the world's changing just a little bit sometimes, and that's affecting my industry along with everyone else's. But of course, I feel it very personally because I'm sensitive. And this terrible twitchiness and sensitivity again pushed me to a point where, to solve the problem, I needed to say to God, I'm going to stop caring about my job. I'm going to stop caring about money. And the weirdest thing happened. At the point at which I really let go, work started to come in again. It was almost as though it was being held back because I was unwilling to do this on God's terms. And this has happened again and again and again. And now, from my general reading, and I won't go into the sort of science of this, but the theory amongst scientists who specialize in the creation of simulated realities, saying if it's possible to create simulated realities which are convincing to the beings that are created that live within them, if it's even possible, the likelihood that any entity that is conscious is actually in a simulated reality. And sometimes one gets this eerie feeling that one might be in a simulated reality for various reasons, and it's of course the basis for the Matrix, which has got a lot of sense in some ways. But the reason I'm saying this is because I'm increasingly believing, after 33 years of paying attention, that things are brought into my life and things are withheld from my life by God until certain lessons have been learned. Of course, this cannot be proved or disproved. It's highly speculative, but it is almost eerie how when I'm digging my heels in and I've got my own objectives and I'm going to make my own life, it's like pushing against a closed door. When I let go completely, opportunities come in that I couldn't have imagined. Again and again and again. I think that is the sense that material well-being follows spiritual progress. Next one, the avoidance of argument, and this is a great line. It is of little use to argue and only makes the impasse worse. And a while ago in sponsorship, I was given the advice by someone. If someone disagrees with something you say, just say, well, let's just stop this here then, because I can't argue. It's not something I'm available for. And it calls the bluff. And my God, it saved so much breakdown in relationship. It sorts things out one way or other. Are we here to argue, or are we here to do the job of sponsorship, which is me simply to pass on some information, suggest some actions, take it or leave it. But also, I may have mentioned this before, but it's such an important point. I hope you'll forgive me for saying it again. I was talking to Jonathan a few months ago, and we were mentioning in our environment a number of people we know were in relationships where there was lots of argument and aggression going on. And I said to him, why don't we argue? Because we don't. He said, because we don't want to. And I've had aggressive relationships. I had a particularly aggressive relationship with the then chairman of the Kensington and Chelsea Conservative Party. I think that might have been my mistake. When it was good, it was very good, but when it was bad, oh boy. And this was a very long time ago. But looking back at that relationship, the aggression and the arguments, they weren't an unpleasant side effect of the relationship. They were the very purpose of the relationship. The conflict was the purpose. All the fun times were the setup. And I've encountered this enough conversations with people where afterwards I realise I've been had, that the first half of the conversation was the setup to create the argument. The argument wasn't a derailing from the relationship's true purpose or the conversation's true purpose. The argument was the purpose. The conversation is absolutely on track. The relationship is on track, which is why when a relationship breaks down and descends into conflict, and it can be conflict which is sought by both sides, it can be conflict which is sought by one side, and then my job is not to engage in it, and that itself often aggravates the aggression from the other side. But in those situations, as soon as there is the desire for conflict, what I've learned is I cannot fix it. There is no spiritual tool, there's no tip, there's no procedure, there's no book to read, there's nothing to watch on YouTube which can help with this. There is literally nothing. And it goes back to the chilling line by Don Pritz where he says, I don't know how to have a healthy sick relationship. If the purpose of the relationship is unhealthy, there is no way to have that relationship in a healthy way. One has to remove the desire for the conflict. And the purpose of the conflict is to, as I said earlier, this nature of victimhood is to shift my general existential guilt onto someone else by creating a situation which appears to be someone else's fault, so that I can be righteous, I can be the victim, and this is now their fault. And I may have mentioned this before, that was a wonderful person on Instagram who says, are you ever bored? Your boyfriend's in the other room and, you're having a nice time, but you're bored. How about cracking open a can of create problem? The good old-fashioned creation of problems, but now in can form. And it's absolutely brilliant because what it unveils is the real dynamic behind domestic aggression in my experience and in many people I've known. It's not a problem, it's not a derailment, it's a purpose. Unless that purpose is foregone, the arguments are going to continue. And one of the remarkable things, when I've had sponsees who've been in and out of violent or aggressive relationships, when they go back, the whole dynamic, it's just like someone resuming drinking. The sequence of events, the well-known stages of the spree, and it just goes round and round and round until the two people are disengaged. It's the only way I've ever gotten over those. Now, the next bit is all about spiritual experiences and how to channel them. I'll do this bit by bit. Assume, on the other hand, that Father has had at the outset a stirring spiritual experience. Overnight, as it were, he is a different man. He becomes a religious enthusiast. He is unable to focus on anything else. Like a gaunt prospector, belts drawn in over the last ounce of food, our pick struck gold. Joy at our release from a lifetime of frustration knew no bounds. Father feels he has struck something better than gold. For a time he may try to hug the new treasure to himself. He may not see at once that he has barely scratched a limitless load which will pay dividends, and this is the key line, only if he mines it for the rest of his life and insists on giving away the entire product. Now, having a spiritual experience is absolutely lovely, and there are times I've almost seen stars, and I've seen reality almost start to melt away, and you start to see something shining from behind it around the edges of objects. And I've heard other people relate similar experiences, and of course, these are wonderful things. But this is just the tip of the iceberg of what a spiritual experience is. And the real job of a spiritual experience is to turn it to good account. And in Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, one of the things he says is that the common feature, the thing which unites all genuine spiritual experiences, is the person that has undergone the experience then wishes to convey it to others. In other words, it's not just a flash. The flash lights a fire, and then the fire wishes to propagate itself. And I may have mentioned this before, but I had a sponsor that completed step 9 a while ago. And I said, how do you feel? And he said, well, it's really awkward because I just feel this immense responsibility to help other people now. And he wasn't even particularly enjoying the feeling. So it's not necessarily enjoyable in that particular moment, the realization that there's a greater mission there. Now, how does one do that? The danger is, of course, that one develops some sort of complex and believes that one is personally tremendously significant and has some great secret that no one else has. Almost everyone that has a spiritual experience will think that they've got something unique. Of course, one's got something ordinary. One's simply had the ordinary nature of reality reveal itself to one. But the way to actually turn this into something valuable, what I was advised to do when I finally did have a proper spiritual experience, go to lots of meetings and find people who are really unhappy and talk to them and start to build relationships, and eventually people will ask you to sponsor them. And I've sponsored in lots of different ways, and at the moment I would say about 95% of my sponsorship minutes, and it's about 2 hours a day, plus maybe an extra hour at weekends, maybe 3 hours a day at weekends. 95% of it is literally just explaining what the book says. And you'd think it would get boring, but it never does, because what one's explaining is the aggregate of one's experience from having implemented it. And that, of course, is always changing. So one is saying new things the whole time. And so many ideas are so remarkably elusive that, particularly in step 1 and in step 3 and on spiritual matters, that you never totally nail it. You never end up with a fixed pattern which just then repeats ad nauseam. It's always striking one as new. This is the remarkable thing. And I think this is the nature of contact with reality. That when you're in contact with reality, because it's constantly changing, it's constantly new. And Anthony de Mello talks about this. When you see someone walk in the room, the danger is that what you see is all of the things that you remember about them, which is terribly repetitive, rather than having an actual experience of the person that is in front of you. And I think this is the problem of boredom in relationships, that one ceases to see the person that is actually there and is simply re-encountering again and again and again the same memory repeating. So you see the person, you activate your memories, and you just experience your own memories again. That's why it's dull. Whereas if you're with someone and you are present to their presence, they're never quite the same twice. I can't remember the Roman poet who says you never step into the same river twice. And that's a sign that you're in contact with reality, that things are constantly changing, even though everything appears to be staying the same. Next point. If the family cooperates, Dad will soon see that he is suffering from a distortion of values, and then a spiritual life which does not include his family obligations may not be so perfect after all. I've known a number of people that have stayed sober for 50 or 60 years. I say no, that makes it sound as though we're terribly chummy. I've met or have talked to briefly. And I know people who know such people, report what they say. One of the big downsides of doing a lot of AA is the risk of neglecting the family. And I'm very, very careful about not overcommitting to AA things that it takes me away from Jonathan. If I have a trip, I ask him if it's okay. He always says yes, but the courtesy is to ask him, and for me to look at the way in which he says yes. Because sometimes he'll say yes in a way that I know it's a concession for him, and I know to be careful about that sort of request again. So I take this very seriously. One of the regrets you get with people who become permanent, sort of full-time AAs, is the family can resent AA because it's taken the person away from them. One caveat, though, particularly about the first year, and the line in the middle of this. During those first days of convalescence, this, working with other alcoholics, will do more to ensure his sobriety than anything else, and also will do more to lift the person out of depression or anxiety or self-absorption or jealousy or envy or whatever the problem du jour is. So I think there sometimes has to be some sacrifice of other things in the early years. Now, I think the AA book provides me with a tremendous philosophy for living, and the philosophy is tied up in the centre of the next paragraph. We have come to believe he would like us to keep our heads in the clouds with him, but our feet ought to be firmly planted on earth. That is where our fellow travellers are, and that is where our work must be done. Now, how this is applied in practice, those two elements actually belie two other ones. So our heads in the clouds, not our heads on earth, and our feet on earth, not our feet up in the air. So you've got the four quadrants there. And so the problem way of living, the material world, someone said to me, is sticky. If you spend too much time with your head there, your head will stick to it and you won't be able to get yourself out of it. And I think the world is fascinating. I read a lot, I pay a lot of attention. But if I start to get entangled, I need to take a break. I need to get out of it. And I go through periods of zero media, periods of zero social media, because I become too attached and I need to detox not from the world, not from the media, but from my attachment to it, my loss of my value and identity and my purpose through its transference into things of the world. And then the other half of the problem is feet in the air. Unstructured free time. Very, very bad for an alcoholic or an addict. So I have a very structured life and I'm very busy. And it's not running oneself into exhaustion in order not to feel anything. I think that's one of the great fallacies about high levels of activity, that it's necessarily a running away. It's only a running away if you're not present for those activities. If you're properly present and you're emotionally, as they say, congruent with those activities, you'll notice a couple of things. You're going to have a lot more feelings, but they'll rush through you and pass out the other side. The same way that when an orchestra is playing, a note sounds, it might echo for a moment, but then it disappears and dissipates and is absorbed into the woodwork. It doesn't carry on forever like a doorbell which is stuck. And sometimes I've seen people in early recovery saying, I'm going to take a break from everything so that I can concentrate on my recovery. So someone else has to go to work to support them. Just FYI, that's how that works. So it's lucky that someone else is able to be present, isn't it? But anyway, just aside from that little point, it's an absolute disaster because the way I've learned how to do the program is by doing things in the world and using the program as the method of doing them. It can't be learnt in the abstract. And so being busy is, as I say, not a problem. And in fact, the best way of running away from your feelings, there's that dreadful line that does the rounds sometimes. I haven't heard it for a long time, maybe because I go to Brick Lane, and I think if someone said it at Brick Lane, a sniper would take them out within a few seconds. But you have to sit with your feelings. Don't they say that in something? To sit with your feelings. I think it comes from the same pot of poison that produces I wished you a long, slow recovery. Now, what sitting with your feelings tends to mean in practice is repeating the same depressing narratives in your head over and over and over, and having the same associated feelings over and over and over. Now, Alan Watts, who I'm not very familiar with, but was no spiritual slouch, said that when you're thinking about things and events and people and ideas, you're thinking about something real. But as soon as you're thinking about your thoughts about those things, you're one stage removed. And then you're thinking about your thoughts about your thoughts about those things, and you're two stages removed. And you can end up in a world which consists only of your own thoughts, which are not about anything anymore. They have no, as it's called, intentionality. They have no aboutness to them. They're just a gas filling a space, and there's no communication between that space and the outside world. There's no point of reference. There's no absolute reality. There's no truth. There's no morality. There's nothing. There's just thoughts circulating about themselves. And I think that is the end result of sitting with your feelings. With difficult feelings, what I tend to find is if I reframe my perception of a situation. I'll give you a very concrete example. I don't like being criticised. It's one of my 7 least favourite things. And I, in the past, have had a horrible habit at work. If there's the remotest criticism, I take it on board and I respond appropriately, but it nags me like a barking dog all day. And particularly if it was unreasonable or exaggerated or had even just the slightest technical error, and I'm so affronted. This is the sensitivity I was talking about earlier. If I reframe it in the moment and say, there is nothing that has happened here. An event commanded my attention. I responded. I've moved on. The feeling takes care of itself. If I get enough distance from it by insisting on not rehashing it again and again and again, the feeling dissipates, it abates. And so it's not sitting with my feelings that helps me get over them. It's getting as far away from the mental error that I made, which produced the negative feeling, getting as far away from that as possible, as quickly as possible, and then I'm on to a winner. And the best way to do that is to get involved in life. Next thing, next thing, next thing. A couple more things, and then we'll have some questions. So the next one, look at this. Let the alcoholic grow up, it says. Thus mother, through no fault of her own, became accustomed to wearing the family trousers. Thus mother became accustomed to wearing family trousers. Father, coming suddenly to life again, often begins to assert himself. And this, I think, comes under the heading of this wishing people a long, slow recovery. I think it's possible to tackle lots of major problems at once in your first year. One simply doesn't have to wait an awful long time to start dealing with money and diet and exercise. It can be a bit of a shock to the system, but I think it can be done. The quicker one starts to treat oneself as a grown-up who is capable of taking responsibility, the better. A couple of other points I'm going to skip past. Next one, don't just do AA. Don't just do AA. This passage, I won't read that, encourages finding other things to be interested in. Part of my recovery requires what I have. That's what they say in the book. If we have what you want, if you want what we have, I got to have something that is wantable. For it to be wantable, I got to be enjoying my life. There was someone many years ago. Now, this isn't his real name, but we'll say his name was Recovered Ron. Because when he shared, he'd say, "My name's Ron, and I'm a recovered alcoholic." No one else was doing that in the room. He was. If everyone in the group is doing it, fine. But being the only one can be a little bit problematic, because it's saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm slightly different than the rest." I understand why people say it, and there's a validity to saying it. There's also validity to just saying alcoholic. There's a validity to saying recovering alcoholic, or I remember someone said, I'm a drunk, my problems, and then he said his name. So whatever you say is fine. But the danger is setting yourself apart. But anyway, this chap would always say he was recovered, but he was a bit on the grim side. And the refrain was, if you're so recovered, you might want to tell your face that. So the best way to get sponsees, I think, is to so obviously have a bit of zip about you, have a bit of ginger in you, have a bit of life. And to have a bit of life, go and enjoy some things. And it's my obligation, as it were, every day to do things I enjoy. Next point is this: be happy, don't get sucked in. And it says, if newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. It says we absolutely insist on enjoying life. Next point, we try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nations, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. So it's what I said earlier. It's fine for me to understand what is going on in the world and to engage with it intellectually. As soon as I get sucked down, detach, rise up, and I'm fine. That combination of head in the clouds with God, always starting the day with God, ending the day with God, as Don Pritt said, move slowly from task to task, resting in God in between. As soon as I get sucked in to anything in the world, then I've got to detach. But it's the same with sponsees and their problems. Those of us who have tried to shoulder the entire burden and trouble of others find we're soon overcome by them. When I was new, I had many tales of woe. If I went to someone with a tale of woe and I saw them start to look sympathetic, I thought, "Oh, you'll be useless. I've already 10 seconds in, I've sucked you in. Now you're sympathetic." Oh, I need people who are not going to get sucked in. Because if I say there's a monster in the room, they go, "Oh my God, where?" Then they can't help me see that there's no monster. The only reason I ever went to someone saying there's a monster in the room is because I wanted to wake up to a world where there was no monster in the room. So the last people I needed were people that also saw my pain and felt it with me. Useless. Absolutely useless. It's this kind of suicidal empathy where I'm holding the hand up for help and the hand of AA comes down. I give it a yank and I pull you down into my misery. Now we're both down here. Disaster. As soon as I see your darkness as real, I cannot help you. I'm now part of your problem, but I'm a mirror that has told you that monster's real. I've needed people that have said things like, no one has ever made you feel anything. Of course, one's frightfully offended the first time one hears this. I needed the meetings where people said misery is optional. I needed, even now, sometimes they forgot to say that pain is inevitable. They just went with the misery is optional side of things. And I remember going round to other meetings saying, I can't believe the people at Vision for You and Joys of Recovery, they're killing people. They're telling people misery is optional. Misery isn't optional. But the reason I engaged in that argument was because I knew they were right, but I couldn't figure out how to get there. If they said God is a huge purple blancmange, I wouldn't have been bothered by that and run around telling everyone that there's a group where they're telling people that God is a purple blancmange, because I would have known that that wasn't real. It is because something in me knew that they were right, that the whole construct of my misery was indeed a construct. So, in order to be useful to people, I need to not get sucked in. And you'll have a crunch point with sponsees sometimes. I had one a couple of years ago who told me a bad thing that had happened. And he told me it before, and I thought it'd been dealt with, but it came back. But it came back. It's like when, a zombie is resuscitated, sometimes it comes back a bit more energetic than its original form. And so by the time the story made its way round the merry-go-round again and came back up in a step 4, it was super dramatized compared to the first time. And I didn't react. And the poor old soul went around to lots of people saying, I was so unsympathetic. And perfectly sympathetic, but I'm not going to dwell on it. We're going to treat this like everything else. I was offering him a way to get past it. He wanted me to get involved in it, and these are two entirely different activities. When those things come up in step 4, you find out what the person really wants. Do they want people to keep them company in their narrative, or do they want to be sprung from the trap? A couple more things and then I really will stop. So we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. And so those are things that I try to foster in my life. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. We cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a vale of tears, though it once was just that for many of us. So this is not to deny the reality of an emotion. If you feel something, you really are feeling the emotion. The question is the emotion an accurate reflection of life and reality, or is it something I've made myself? As they would have said 40 years ago in one of those television programs where they would demonstrate arts and crafts. Here's one I made earlier. And whenever I've gone to people with negative feelings, that's really what I'm saying. Here's one I made earlier. Unless I recognize I'm doing the making, then I'll never get past it. And this goes with the next paragraph. We're not victims, is my commentary. It is clear that we made our own misery. God didn't do it. But this idea that God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. When I'm looking at a situation and I appear to be unhappy, I've upset myself about it. My premise in reframing is there is a way of being inside this situation whether it's personal or global or geopolitical or societal. There is a way of being present for this in a way that makes me happy, joyous, and free. What is it? God showed me how. And I have the fortune to have studied a very long time ago now, but Russian literature, and I specialized in for a while in the literature of the 1920s and the 1930s. And it's fascinating because it was a society where you were told what to think and you were told what to do. And there was a righteous brigade of people telling everyone how to feel about everything. And of course, Russian authors were not having any of it. And the brilliance of 1920s and 1930s and into the 40s as well. They got a lot duller after Khrushchev came in, things calmed down a bit. But the sheer brilliance of those authors in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, Karamzin, Mayakovsky and Bulgakov, is that they refused to be repressed. They refused to be cowed. They refused to be put down. They refused to stop laughing at things, even in the days before they were carted off and shot against a wall, taken off to a gulag. And that's the attitude. If they can do it, I can do it. You listen to the humour in Shostakovich's symphonies, exactly the same thing. To not look at terrible things and say, well, I have to feel terrible about this, because I don't. And that's not just a philosophically advantageous position to adopt and a pragmatically advantageous position to adopt. It's also God's will. So my moral choice is to be happy, joyous, and free, come what may. And until I've found a way to be those things in whatever the situation is, I haven't looked hard enough. So on to some questions. So keep them, a few have come in. Keep them coming into the chat. With regards to considering purposes of relationships, i.e. conflict or argument, is it helpful to bring this up directly in conversation with the person in question? No, don't do that. Don't do that. If you want to stay alive, don't do that. You can't tell anyone anything, is the truth of it. People can only be told something that they already know. Unless it's how to tie a reef knot or how to conjugate a Japanese verb, you can tell people those things. But you really can't tell people anything they don't know already. I don't know if you know the banana in the ear story. So, chap goes into a pub and there's a man there with a banana sticking out of his ear. And he says to the man, why have you got banana in your ear? And the man says, what? And he says, why have you got banana in your ear? And the man says, what? And eventually, the man takes the banana and says, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I couldn't hear. I had a banana in my ear. And the fact is, there doesn't have to be a reason. It is simply what he's doing. You're not giving him any new information. The choice has been made. And the choice was made if I'm in a relationship with someone and their purpose is argument, they made that decision 30, 40 years ago and have replicated it hundreds of times. I can't give them a piece of information and they're not going to go, oh my God, I had no idea. They're going to have to come to that themselves. Now, the question is, if you're in a relationship which is characterized by anger and conflict, what can one do? I think there are two options. One option is just walk. The other option is to say, if I wanted peace, what would I say? moment by moment. So they've just said this, what would peace look like? And it might look like simply saying, okay, yes, just agree with everything. Or no. Why? And they want the argument. No why, just no. To refuse to engage in the argument. And within a few days or weeks, either the relationship is over or the whole tenor of the relationship changes. My dear old mother was a little bit of an arguer, a little bit of an agent provocateur, as they say. And when I used to go and see her with Jonathan, she'd lay into me. This was about 15 years ago. Our relationship resolved. But she would lay into me. And Jonathan would go and get some bribes in the form of champagne and chocolates and things and come back. And she'd have got it out of her system, then he'd give her the flowers and the champagne. She'd be happy. Once she tried to have a go at him, and he laughed at her. And she said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Because you're being ridiculous." She never tried it again. Now, he could do it with such an air of lightness. It worked. I remember once she was trying to needle me about, and so there was a turning point where I decided I'm not going to be part of any argument or aggression or negative interaction. So my job was to view her with entire peace as a purely innocent creature and to ask God moment by moment what to say and to stay inside my own hula hoop of being happy, joyous and free. I remember once she was needling me. She was having a go. She was saying, "Why have you done this? Why have you made this decision about your life? What do you think about my view?" She presented her view. She said, "What do you think about it?" I said, "I don't know." And it was true. I decided not to draw a conclusion on what she'd said. And we carried on talking. She said, "To come back to the earlier point, have you come to a view yet?" I said, "No." And then she changed the subject. She came back to it the third time. She said, "Do you still not know what you think yet?" I said, "No, I don't know what I think." And for the first time in one of these exchanges, she laughed. She said, "You're never going to have a view, are you?" I said, "No." And that was one of the last times she tried it. When the game is over, if I stop playing the game on one side, the whole dynamic changes. I remember Maureen said this to me 32 years ago. You know those things called mobiles? Not mobile phone, but the old sense of mobile, which was this contraption which would be positioned above a cot, and there'd be these long, thin spindles, and from each of the spindle would be hanging a little figure, and there'd be lots of these interlocking spindles. And you give it a little touch, and it would turn round, and all of these spindles would rotate in different ways, and the child would look up mesmerized at all of these little creatures or planets moving around in these complex movements. And she said that's a family dynamic. She got this from Robert Lefebvre, actually. That's where this image came from. I don't know where he got it from. But she said if you took a pair of scissors and you cut one of the strings from which one of the creatures is dangling, the whole thing would start spinning chaotically until it found its new dynamic equilibrium. So you change one element in the family dynamic and everything gets much worse until it finds its new equilibrium. Now, sometimes it's just impossible to remain. They may kick you out of the system, you may have to leave the system. But sometimes from within the system, the only time I've really managed it is with family members where you have to stay in the game because they're getting older. Someone needs to look after them. There's an obligation there. And I don't know how to cut a parent out of one's life and not have it be a constant phantom limb. And so I had to learn how to deal with. With other people, things are more disposable. Someone said, I'm having difficulty identifying resentments for step 4. I tend to suppress them or rationalize them quickly. So unless something just happened recently or I'm face to face with the person, I don't really feel or remember them. When I try to sit down and recall resentments, my mind goes blank. The only thing I can work on is day-to-day annoyances, but that is about it. How should I approach step 4 in this situation? Brilliant. The thing is, the road of resentment in a step 4 inventory is, I think the role of the examination is twofold. The first reason we examine them is in order to realize how ridiculous they are, to enable us to get over them by growing up. Why do we need to do this? Well, getting over it and growing up are things one should reach for gently. But the resentments, the general blaming of other people, is standing in the way of looking at one's own character defects. It's like the alarm system has to be turned off in the museum before the burglar can come in and steal the jewels. That's the first reason. Also, self-will is discovered. The nature, the content of the self-will is discovered by looking at the resentments. So your resentment tells you what you want. It tells you all of the things that the ego wants. Now, the word resentment in the Big Book is a technical term. It mustn't be confused with the word resentment in the language. When you look at how it's used on pages 64 and 65, it's essentially talking about any situations where we're resentful, we're angry, we're sore, we're burned up, we have a grudge, we feel interfered with, we feel hurt, or we feel threatened. There is no sense that this feeling has to be persistent, durable, recurring, or even particularly profound. None of those are requirements for the examination. Now, if one's already terribly good at rationalizing them, you won't have any trouble doing the page 67 questions because there won't be many people to forgive. But one can still do the exercise of looking at these reactions. So the fact that the reaction is fleeting or isn't durable because there's a degree of maturity there doesn't mean you can't look at what happened. And with some self-honesty, if one wants to be honest, one can see the reaction. One starts to see, you can have a reaction in a flash, and in 10 seconds it's gone, but you can reconstruct afterwards what happened. What was it that caused that reaction? That's what you're interested in. Nailing the external fact, and the internal desires are the inverse of whatever is going on. They're like the negative of it, like the photographic negative. One could talk more about that, but that's the basic answer. Question. Should the word only, when mentioned in the Big Book on numerous occasions, be emphasized when sponsoring? I'm not really sure what the question is about, but there's one point where it's terribly important in step 11. Praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. I'm a great fan of doing the program. I'm a great fan of doing the program as it's set out, and I'm a great fan of not going beyond the program. So where the program says we pray only for that, I'm extremely averse to doing any form of prayer which seeks to secure for me particular outcomes in the world. So I was talking to someone about this last few days. I'm very skeptical of manifesting. I'm also skeptical of prayer used as a means of trying to heal oneself or to heal other people or to bring about positive change in the world or positive change in other people's lives or to pray other people into recovery. it seems to me like self-will being used for a spiritual end. Now, there may be practitioners who are able to do that without their ego getting involved. I ain't one of them. So I just stick to praying for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out. And the only keeps me safe. The onlys keep me safe in step 4. I only look at what it asks me to look at. I don't go into any kind of psychological analysis of myself. Just the facts, man. Just the facts. So the onlys keep me safe. Last couple of questions. Question: if someone is only in the door of AA or CA and is immediately asking for work off members, is it wise to help them with finding work before a few weeks before I can't understand the grammar there. Before a few weeks them taking recovery seriously? When I was new, I know I'm going to sound like one of these awful old people that complains about the young people today and how much better it was in the olden days. They found this Abyssinian tablet from 6,000 years ago written in cuneiform. I don't know if it was in Linear A or Linear B or one of those languages. And when they finally deciphered it, it was an old bloke complaining how the youth of his day were not taking things seriously and didn't have any respect for their elders. So plus ça change, plus ça reste la même chose. So what they said when I was new, which was just after the repeal of the Corn Laws and the abolition of the gold standard, what they said was get a job, get a where to find, which has had the meetings list, get an A to Z so you could find your way to the meetings. That was the book with all the maps of London. Get yourself a telephone card. So that carbon dates my recovery. You can do both. You can get a job and take AA seriously on the same day. I don't think there's any contradiction between the two, which gives the lie to that I'm going to take my recovery seriously and just do recovery for a year. If you just do recovery for a year, you'll probably do nothing. So, yes, get him cracking, help him find a job. That's probably the best thing for his recovery. So that's all I've got, Keith. There we go.